welcome everybody to this new iteration of our Telerik webinars. Today we're going to talk about ASP.NET MVC and Bootstrap 4. So as you might already know, Bootstrap 4 is the latest version of what was originally called Twitter Bootstrap. Now it's just Bootstrap. It's an open source product. You can use it for adding CSS and layouts to your applications. And the topic that concerns us today, of course, is how you can leverage it within an MVC application. My name is Ignacio Fuentes. I am a sales engineer with Telerik, and I will be walking you through this, this demo today. So with that, I'm actually going to go and get started. No need for slides. I'm going to go straight into my Visual Studio installation right here, and I'm actually going to go and create a completely new project. We do have a Telerik ASP.NET MVC template that you can use. In fact, when you open it, it gives you a couple of options that we can pick. I am going to be using plain .NET Framework and MVC, but keep in mind the exact same concepts will apply in .NET Core 1 or even .NET Core 2, because our UI for ASP.NET MVC library supports all those options. So just by doing that, I get this list of templates that we can use. I'm actually going to start with the blank template. So as I do that, what this template is going to set up for me is essentially a clean Visual Studio solution with not a lot of stuff going on. In fact, I don't believe it's got, it doesn't have any controllers or any views. It only actually just has a template. So, I mean, before we add anything, of course, we at least need to have a controller. So I'll quickly go ahead and do that. I'll add a controller, just a plain controller, call it the home controller. So as I do that, of course, the only thing that I have is an index page, but in itself doesn't even have its corresponding view. So I can quickly also add a view for it. Just hit enter, enter again. And we don't have Bootstrap and we don't have anything set up at this point, but we are at least live, if you will. So of course, at this point, I do want to get started adding Bootstrap things. Now, the easiest way to get started with Bootstrap is just, go straight to the documentation for Bootstrap 4 in this case. Now, when it comes to Bootstrap 4 and Bootstrap 3, some things are very much the same. Some things are very much the same in terms of API, in that the way that you interact with them is the same, but the actual underlying implementation might be a little bit different. Now, to get started, they actually have a started template, and it's just as easy as an HTML page. Now, where would you put that in an MVC application? Of course, this would belong in what you would call the layout of your MVC application. Now, of course, the thing about just essentially replacing this whole thing with that file is that, there are some things that we do need right here, but I think we can quickly add them back into the application. Oops, there we go. So I'm just going to copy and paste that there. And instead of this hello world, we need to bring it back to the MVC world and have the render body right there. And that should be basically it when it comes to adding Bootstrap 4 into your application. Not much should have changed. Looks a little bit different because Bootstrap is already doing its magic into styling the application. So, of course, what I've done at this point is I removed the Kendo references. There is no Kendo all anymore, and there is no there's not the required CSS files or anything like that. So we need to basically re-add them. Now, I am going to do something different than what we had before, because I actually want to keep it all right here at the bottom of the page, and you probably want to do that as well for the performance of your application. So to do that, essentially, we need to keep jQuery there. We need to keep this popper library that is used by Bootstrap and Bootstrap itself. Those all need to stay there. We just need to re-add the two relevant files for MVC development, and that is kendo.all.js and kendo.asp.netmvc.js. Now we also need, usually you would have a Kendo theme. We actually have a specific Kendo theme that is meant for Bootstrap v4 development. So I'll add that right below the regular Bootstrap file that we got from Bootstrap's documentation. So with that, we have essentially everything that we need with one exception. Bootstrap is using a version of jQuery that is, first of all, it's 3.2.1, and they're using a slim version of jQuery, but Kendo actually requires the full version of jQuery. So we are going to do that. And, this might work with Kendo, but I would recommend to stick with what the official documentation of Kendo says, and that is to use up to 3.1.1 for jQuery when you're using it with Kendo UI. But with this in place, nothing much should have changed. We probably want to keep the developer tools open, but yeah, we don't see any errors or any problems. So I think we can get started. So one usual thing that you want to add with Bootstrap, and this is where the kind of like the new things of Bootstrap will come into play, is that you probably want to add something like a navbar to your page. Navbar used to exist for Bootstrap 3, and the concepts are very much the same for Bootstrap 4, but the markup for it is actually, I would dare to say, much cleaner. So if you go to the Bootstrap documentation, they'll probably have, they have something very simple for you to essentially add to your page. So let's go ahead and do that. This is, again, something that would not belong in any specific view. As we have currently, we only have a home controller and an index action, but we're probably going to add more actions here, and they're all going to have the same type of navigation. So that is something that you would potentially want to put above the body of the specific view that you want to render. So by doing that, we should have, if I refresh this page, we should have a navbar, as we see right here. Now, this is, of course, the sample that they give. You can actually play around with it, change a couple of things. For instance, maybe we want to change the, we want it to be not light, but maybe dark. And maybe we want another color. There are a couple of classes that we can use. For instance, the success one, you can do that. And just by doing that, again, refreshing our page should give us a different looking navbar. Now, of course, the goal of this is to connect it to different actions within our MVC application. So let's go ahead and say that we are going to add maybe some different options right here. We have home. This is where we're going to show some of the Bootstrap things that we're looking at right now, but maybe we want to focus on the MVC controls as well on a separate view. And maybe we don't need this disabled button. We'll just do, for completeness sake, we'll do an about page. So of course, by doing that, the only thing we've done at this point is we've changed the text of them, but there's no, there's nothing going on. So what we have is links. That is essentially what's being rendered at this point. You want to change these links, of course, to do something, MVC-like. But we want to keep this classes. There are a few things you can do. There are, HTML action links. That's one approach. It's up to you how you want to handle it. I like to keep it, a little bit cleaner with this HTML-looking tag and just modify the URL. Now, the URL, you can get it by essentially using this helper class that we're going to point it, in this case, to the index action of the home controller. And just by doing that, I think we need this. Just by doing that, we have one link to go to the home, one link to go to the MVC Controls page. I guess we can call it controls. and one more for that about page. So let's go to about, and this will be about. Press save, and we can see at the bottom of the screen that it is going to be pointing to those URLs. Of course, this URLs don't have anything right now, so there's going to be an error. So we can get started adding this couple of other views that we can work with. Go back to my controller and just essentially copy this index action, copy this in the section twice, and let's do one for controls and do one for the about page. And we need to add the corresponding views. So simply add a view, that'll be fine. And the same for the about, we'll add a view to it. Okay, so with that, run it again. And hopefully, if I'm doing this right, we can see that now it is navigating. But we do notice one problem. Even though I am in the about page, the home page is the one that has this kind of looking, active CSS class that makes it seem to the user that that's the page that you are on. And that is governed by this active CSS class. The question is, of course, how can we add this active CSS class dynamically? Because we don't want it to be, we don't want it to be always in the home markup. So one way to do that, there's quite a few ways that you can do it, but essentially you can write a little bit of code right here that could basically get what is the name of the controller that you're on, and the name of the action, and then based on it. In fact, we only need the name of the action for this implementation because everything is under the home controller. So if I believe it's under the view context, and then there should be some routing data, and then values. We care about, not the controller, we could care about the controller. It depends on the exact website that you're building. If you have more than one controller and they're all sharing the same layout, you probably want to do more logic here. But this should be enough for us, because if it is the index that we're on, then we actually want to show that that active CSS class. But if it's not, you don't want it there. And of course, the same will apply. The same will apply for the different options that we have. So active. Here it is. I think that should be about right. And then the same right here. Now, of course, this is going to map to the controls. And to the about, index controls, about. Okay, so I can save that, go back to the page, save it, and see what I did. Now we can see that the selected item on this menu is corresponding to the action that I'm on. It's one way to do it. There are some people that prefer to do it via JavaScript or something like that. I like to keep it, if the server can send the correct markup from the beginning, then that's good. By the way, I want to change this BG success. I think we can use something more akin to what you should be doing. In this case, the primary color of the Bootstrap theme that I'm using. So here we go. And this button, we don't actually need that search bar, but I guess we can actually leave it there. Just don't want that. I don't want that green stuff right there. So let's kill it. It's just a regular button. I am going to make my font a little bit bigger in case some people are having a hard time seeing what I'm writing. All right. So with this in place, hopefully you can see what's going on. We can now start adding some other Bootstrap controls. When you're working with Bootstrap, by the way, you're probably going to be using, and if you've used Bootstrap 3, you're going to be familiar with the grid system. So let's go to the layout section of the documentation for Bootstrap. And we can see that usually you want to use something like a div with the class of container. With a class of container. There's either container if you want it fixed or if you want it fluid so that it will take the whole screen and it will kind of readapt when you move it around. I like to use a fluid. So you can either do that in the layout or you can do it for the specific page that you're working on. It might be simpler so that you have more flexibility on the other pages. So just by doing that, you're going to have a container. You always want to have everything within the container. And the way that Bootstrap works is that essentially you're going to have rows. So you want to add the class row. And of course, within a row, you're going to have columns. So there's a couple of things we can do here regarding these columns. The simpler thing that we can do is, let's say that we want to add, I don't know, maybe 4 columns. So just by doing that, actually, we should have something on the screen that's going to give us some information on how Bootstrap works. This is going to be 4 columns. I'm gonna look at it. So we have 4 columns. So just by doing that, it's already being helpful to us. We can actually add some CSS classes to this. For instance, BG success, BG maybe primary as well, BG warning, maybe BG info. So this sets up the columns, and there we go. We have 4 columns. We can also add some margin to this. One way to do it is, again, with some new classes. I think it's margin Y and 5 as in 5 times 5 times there's 5, essentially 5 ways you can do it. It's going to be from smaller to bigger. So there's some contextual here. It depends on the parent element where it's on, etc. This is part of the newest approach for the Bootstrap 4. But the point is that we get at the end of the day, there's 4 columns. They are all of the same size, and that's essentially it. That's one way to do it. Of course, you actually might want to have a little bit more control over each of the columns. So we can work with the complete zooming, with the complete grid system. So that could be different size of the columns per column. So let's say we add just another. We're going to add another row to this. Let's just copy and paste this one. And we can add a little bit more logic here. Maybe we don't want it to be necessarily all of the same size. So maybe we want a little bit more control over what happens for smaller devices. So maybe we can say that for a smaller device, I wanted to take the whole screen, and for medium to large devices, maybe it can take 3. Right, so 3 is going to be 3 out of 12. In total, there's going to be 12 columns within this grid. So this is why 12 means the whole screen, and 3 is going to be essentially a 4th. So we can do that for all of these. Let's copy and paste that. All right, I'm going to zoom out. Actually, it seems you guys preferred it without so much zoom. All right, we'll do that. So just by doing that, 1, 2, 3, 4 again. Now we have, you know, they look the same, but in theory, if we did this right, eventually at some point they need to be stacked on top of each other, because we told Bootstrap that when it was on the smaller devices, they need to be on top of each other because they're going to be taking the whole screen, as opposed to the one that we did before where we said that even on smaller devices, they need to be all of the same width, which is very cool. Now we can add, you know, something more exciting than a 1, 2, and 3, and 4 in there. In fact, I think we can take out this backgrounds and add some content in it. One of the newer things that was added by Bootstrap 4 was the concept of cards. And this is replacing a few classes that they had before. I believe it was wells and panels. So now we can just simply add cards, and they're a little bit simpler to use. They have clean markup. So let's go and see how they do cards now. So a simple card, as you can see, is this type of UI that's, you know, it's very popular nowadays. Essentially, you add a card and then you put the card body. There's all kinds of styles that we can add. So let's go ahead and add, you know, one card for the first column. And see what that looks like. And we'll just add more cards later. Here we go, this is the first card. Let's add more advanced cards. There's more. Let's see what we can add. Kitchen sink, header and footer. This one's nice. They actually have a section for the cards, different styles that you can use. I believe it's card styles, yeah. So maybe we can add one of these danger cards. Actually, I don't think that we need this style for this one. And just add one more. There's one that's, there's a list. Oh, here it is. Add it to that last one. Clean up the markup a bit. And I think we can actually make one of these, the active item. So by doing that, we've added 4 cards to the application. And like I mentioned, of course, for smaller size screens, they will get stacked on top of each other. So this is, you know, some of what's new with Bootstrap. Like I said, many of the concepts are still the same. It's just the underlying implementation. For instance, they're using they are using Sass to produce Bootstrap now instead of less. We are working with just the CDN, essentially using the precompiled, minified, and ready to go version of Bootstrap. But you can build your own version if you basically modify Sass variables and compile it yourself and produce a different theme based on it. And in fact, you can actually produce a custom version of Kendo's Bootstrap theme also based on those variables that you modify. So the variables will be the same. So based on those variables, you can create a new Bootstrap theme and a new Kendo Bootstrap theme. Now, as usual, though, we can work with our controls. So we've already added the Kendo Bootstrap theme. So that means that I can come in here, and let's say we go to that controls page. And, you know, just like before, we are going to add this container, and we're probably going to add a couple of rows here. So let's just paste that and close them out. clear that a bit. So let's see, maybe on the first row, first column actually, we can add something like a Kendo button, right? So a Kendo button, you know, you would expect it to be essentially copy pasting from the side as well. So I don't know if you've been to this page. This is the demos page for MVC Controls. Within this page, you can actually pick what theme you want to use. So for instance, if I go to the button right here, I can take a look at what the button looks like with any of our themes. And we have, like I mentioned before, we had Bootstrap v3 support, and in beta, we have Bootstrap v4. Please keep in mind, by the way, the Bootstrap itself is currently in beta. It was in alpha for a while. Now it's in its beta stage. But as usual with Kendo UI, it should be as simple as copying and pasting from the documentation, and we put it right here inside of this column. Clean the markup a little bit. And just by doing that, we should have, okay, so one thing I forgot to mention, we actually don't have a Kendo button right here. We have a JavaScript error right now. The reason for that is because I chose to use, to put the jQuery and the Kendo files at the bottom of the page. And if we see the source code for the page, it's attempting to use Kendo before it's been added. So there's one way to get around that. And in fact, there's one recommended way to implement this, and that is to use deferred script. So essentially, I can go into my layout and say, after everything has been said and done, don't forget to render the Kendo scripts. And that is via this deferred scripts method, which essentially means that on the controls, I want to use right here, the deferred method. And that is going to put the markup now at the bottom, which is why we have now a Kendo button. And if we see the source code, we should see that now the script that is relevant to Kendo initializing of widgets is at the bottom right there. So that is deferred initialization. And this is why we can see that even though we have you know, the HTML markup for the bottom right here, the actual jQuery call and the Kendo call is at the bottom. Hopefully that makes sense. And we can, of course, we can add you know, the Kendo button itself. It's a simple control, but it's very powerful. It gives you styles without having to do much. We can see all of these different versions. Maybe we can add one of these disabled buttons, for instance. Here it is. So again, we're just going to copy and paste it and put it within our app. Paste that there. Clean it up a bit. And this is the disabled button. And the reason why it didn't work is, again, because I didn't set it to be deferred. And there we go. We have a primary button and a disabled primary button. You know, as usual with Kendo controls, you have access to all the events. So for instance, maybe I can do something with the click event of this button, and we'll call it, you know, my function. This essentially requires that you have a script somewhere that has a function called my function, and that should allow us to potentially say, hello world. And that should be on the primary button. And there we go, hello world. So of course you could do a lot more advanced things, but the point is that it's just like in any other scenario, Telerik MVC controls, which are, you know, wrappers for the Kendo controls, they will work in the JavaScript environment, in the JavaScript context, and they're going to be using the Kendo Bootstrap v4 theme. Now, of course, we can add more advanced things. Let's say we want to add right below this row, we'll add another row. Let's just copy and paste this right here. And we'll close out those two divs. And there we go. So we can add another column. Maybe we can do what we were doing before. Maybe we can have it take in, if it's a small device, the whole screen. But if it's from a medium or larger device, we can have it be half of the screen, something like that. Maybe we can get started right away and do the 2 columns. So 1 and 2, just to test that we're doing things right. Should have the 2 columns taking the whole thing. We don't need this right now. We see the 1 and we see the 2, and then we see the 1 and the 2 on top of each other, which is good. So we can add something like let's say that we want to add a Kendo Grid on the first one, right? Again, we can actually just go straight to the documentation for Kendo UI. Of course, the grid is a little bit of a complex control because it requires, data binding and things like that. But I think we have time. I think we can do something with the grid. So let's look at the code. Maybe we'll do the local data binding one for simplicity. Units in stock. This should be good. We're just going to copy and paste this right here. We're going to have a little bit of a hiccups before everything is done. We're going to paste that there. We know that we're going to need the deferred call. Now, the reason why it's not working is because, first of all, we don't have a model for this page, right? So in order for us to have a model, we probably need a list of products for this page. So we can quickly add a class to this. Let's call it Controls View Model. Controls View Model. Very quickly. And we know that we'll need a public class of product, which is what the grid is of. And just by doing that, we'll know that this will have a enumerable of product. We'll call it products. And a product itself, according to the grid, has a couple of properties, which were product name, unit price, units in stock, and discontinued. All right, let's add that. Product name. Unit price. Units in stock. And discontinued. Of course, this is probably a Boolean. This is probably an int. This is probably a decimal. And the product name is of that. And we can just, we can do a controls view model constructor that sets the products to be a bunch of products. Maybe we can do, we'll do from 0 to 100. Select new product, and we'll have the product name to be equal to my product plus num. Hopefully that will work. So now we have a controls view model that we can pass down to this controls class. So let's do my VM equals a new controls view model that we pass down to the control, to the view. And that means that the view needs to be strongly typed of type, what is it again? Controls view model. This is going to require probably, oops. There we go. And again, this is now going to require, let's compile it maybe. Public enumerable products, controls view model dot products. Should work. I might have done something wrong, but let's check it out first. See what happens. Oh, no, there we go. We got a grid. I just don't know how to spell, it seems. So let's go and fix that. My product. And there we go. And like I said, it is a grid that is taking half of the screen. The second, we're going to maybe use something like a chart. We'll put it right there. So let's go to the charts. Actually, let's go to the back here and find the charts. Maybe the line chart. Here we go. Again, we can simply copy, paste the code from the documentation, put it within our app under controls. Instead of 2, we actually want a chart. And I will not forget this time to defer it. Just by doing that and refreshing our page, we now have a chart and a grid stacked next to each other. But like I said, if it was on a smaller screen, they're on top of each other. Now, one final thing, I guess, for completeness sake, let's go ahead and add another Bootstrap control here. I like the Jumbotron. I actually don't have a good use for it, but I just think it looks very, very nice. And I'm sure that designers will have a good use for it. Just go ahead and copy that, put it on our About page that we have right here, making use of the Bootstrap controls, and say, thanks all for coming. There we go. Save that. Where is it? Here it is. Go to the About page. And there we go. So that is about what I wanted to cover today. So I think I want to open up now the floor for everybody to ask any questions they want to throw at us, and we'll do our best to respond. And hopefully this was useful to you on how you can get started with using MVC. You know, many of the MVC concepts, of course, we can actually make this application a lot more, you know, more advanced. We could add all kinds of layers and maybe HTML partials and repository patterns and things like that. But overall, the main MVC concepts are here, and it works very nicely with both Bootstrap and the Telerik MVC controls. So any questions, we're happy to respond. We see, thank you, glad to hear. Will you provide a recording? Yes, we will. Any idea when Bootstrap 4 and Kendo support will be out of beta? So Bootstrap 4 is the main culprit for the support being out of beta. It was in alpha for the longest time, and it was just released to beta. It must have been around, I think, I don't know, it was like 3 weeks or a month ago. I might be wrong about that, but it was in alpha for a long time, and now it's finally in beta. So I don't think we're going to see any breaking changes as we were seeing changes before. It seems to me like it's very stable. So I would still recommend you use it. It's up to you if you want to actually use it in production or not. That might not be the greatest idea because there's always a risk of things changing. But yeah, it's not something that we control. It's on them. Can we get a copy of this solution? Yes, I will be putting this up on GitHub, and we're going to be writing a blog post on the kind of like to recap what we covered today. So you'll get a recording, a recap of exactly what we covered, and I will put the complete solution. In fact, it might be even cleaner. I'm going to clean it up a bit so that you don't have to deal with any of the quirks. In fact, I might have the grid be a little bit more interactive so that you can modify, edit, delete, etc. with a embedded database, a SQL Express database as part of the application. So yeah, that will be all up on my GitHub, which will be linked on the recap blog post. Can I implement Bootstrap and Kendo UI in ASP.NET Ajax? Well, you could. We have UI for ASP.NET Ajax as part of our Telerik suite, but of course, Kendo is a JavaScript library. So of course, at that point, you're not going to be using MVC. You're going to be using ASP.NET Ajax. But yeah, the Kendo controls will work just fine. It's just that it might be just easier to use Ajax controls. But I am not sure about Bootstrap v4 for Ajax as of now. We could do some research on that and take it offline. Can you tell us what are the major changes between Bootstrap 3 and 4? Okay, so as I was mentioning before, there's quite a few changes. But in reality, when it comes to what people use, things are very much the same. The grid system is very much the same. There are now, there's support for small screens, extra small screens, medium screens, large screens, and now I believe they have an extra large screen. I guess for when you're looking at a website from a super high-res monitor. So they added another breakpoint there for even larger screens. The way that they have implemented the grid system now is using Flexbox, which means that they are now not supporting, I don't believe they are supporting IE8 anymore, and even IE9, I think they're not supporting. The cards features that we're actually looking at the screen right now, this is completely new, and this is one of the biggest changes that they've done, that they did in that it replaced 3 CSS classes. I think it was wells and panels and one more. So the cards in itself are completely new. And, there's quite a few things. Like I said, there's the SAS build system that they're using now. It makes it for a much cleaner build system. The way that they're dealing with percentages now is more relative, using the concept of M and REM, which again, it's very much documented and it's out there. Yeah, and there's a few things, but overall, I think it's very similar in the way that people use it, but it's cleaner, it's faster, it's smaller, and in my opinion, it's just much better. Thank you. This was helpful. How to display dynamic column using container class. So you can use a container, and you can simply add all the columns that you like, and they will be they will be basically of the same size, and you can have them like one be twice of the other. But yeah, as the more columns that you add, the better. The thing is that if you add them with a specific number, then you need to worry yourself with the fact that there can be more than 12. So you shouldn't be adding more than 12 columns ever. And if you add less than that, and you don't add any number to it, any specific value to it, then they'll all take up the same space. But anything else is up to the actual specific case that you want to deal with. Let's see. More tutorial about Bootstrap would be good. Can you make one again? Well, we'll see. It's possible. We'll do another one on Bootstrap. This was meant more on MVC and Bootstrap, to be honest. So the idea was that you get an idea on how Kendo controls, MVC controls, and the overall layout. The active CSS class, how you could potentially make it render properly on the page that you're on, etc. Can you apply Bootstrap CSS directly to one of your grid examples? So, you would want to stick with essentially using the Bootstrap CSS theme, the Kendo theme that is using Bootstrap. That would be the approach. But of course, depending on which CSS class, you can apply it to any of this of these items right here. So potentially, you could think about maybe add a specific BG color to it, and that should work just fine. But when it comes to the style of the grid, it might be better to essentially rely on the Kendo theme, because if you modify your Bootstrap theme, you should also modify your Kendo theme so it looks like it. It just makes it more robust. But yeah, you can for a one-off, you can totally kind of apply any CSS class to it. At the end of the day, it's all governed by CSS. Got a few questions here. All right, somebody's asking, where can I get a free version? Of course, Bootstrap itself is free, and the MVC controls, you can get started with a trial. And if you go to the demos page, there will be a try now button. That'll take you to kind of download the product and set it up in your Visual Studio environment. We didn't get exactly what is the deferred option for. Sure. So when you add a widget to the page, this is optional, by the way. You don't have to do the deferred option. I just recommend it because it makes for cleaner markup. When you're doing html.kendo. Let's go back to the button. It might be simpler. html.kendo.button, right? That requires two things to happen. One of them is the markup needs to be there, the actual HTML, because this is not HTML, right? And the other thing is JavaScript needs to be executed. Now, the question is, do you want the JavaScript to be added right here, right? Do you want it right here where it's going to be cluttering up your markup, or do you want it at the bottom of the page? So if you don't do the deferred option, it will be right here. It will be, in a way, cluttering your HTML. And it will also require that Kendo be at the top of the page. So Kendo, right here, we have it at the bottom of the page. If we put it at the top of the page, then of course, any Kendo calls in the middle or in the body will work. But since I have it at the bottom of the page, and this is a best practice to do for your JavaScript code, then you need to use the deferred scripts. But like I said, it's optional. It's just the way that I prefer to structure it, and I would recommend that you do it like that. But there are some reasons not to sometimes. So, okay. Can this be used with Angular 4? In fact, it is. This webinar was inspired by an Angular 4 version that we did prior to this one, which was how to use Angular 4, Kendo UI for Angular 4, essentially with Bootstrap 4. So we decided to do the same for MVC. So yes, the answer is it can very much be used with Angular 4. We're going to go from here. Could you put a Kendo Grid in one of the cards? I don't think that would be the best idea. I haven't tried that. So I'm not sure if the card UI is meant to be holding a grid. It would depend on exactly what you want out of it at the end. We use your grids a lot, and we'll see a lot of code to resize them to fill the div. How responsive is the grid in Bootstrap? Do we have to resize? So the grid in itself is responsive regardless of Bootstrap. I don't think it's going to act any different. So it does have some built-in responsive features, and we are working on adding more to them, of course. At the end of the day, it is hard for a grid to work, exactly as you would expect on a mobile device, because essentially, if you're looking at a grid with 100 columns, how is it going to be a good user experience on a mobile device. But we do have some features like deciding which of the columns you want to hide, depending on the screen resolution, etc. Those features are independent of Bootstrap, but yeah, they will work, of course, within a Bootstrap environment. So you're going to put a presentation on your website? Yes, the recording of the presentation is going to be up. We have a legacy.NET web forms application planning on moving to MVC. Do you advise Telerik MVC Controls or Kendo UI? If you're going to be relying on MVC, meaning that you're going to be using server rendering, you're going to be using the Razor view engine, and a lot of your code is going to be very much Razor heavy, then yes, you want to use Telerik MVC Controls. Now, if the application is more going to be like a single page application where everything is happening on the client side, everything is going to be HTML5 and JavaScript, and MVC is used essentially to receive JSON requests and respond with JSON responses, then you want to use plain Kendo UI. At the end of the day, both will work, but if you're in a Razor environment, you want to use the Razor controls. When a new version of Kendo comes out, how do you recommend upgrading? If I use the pop-up in VS and have Kendo do it for me, it takes forever. It should not take forever. That does not sound about right. So there might be an issue going on because the wizard is supposed to upgrade, in a couple of seconds. I get a gracias, Ignacio, gracias. So in terms of probably we're having a Visual Studio bug. When you change the model, sometimes you have to close this CSHTML. Oh, I'm not surprised. We have a couple of bugs in the CSHTML engine of Visual Studio. Can you go over the grid example again, where we're running a little bit low on time, but we can take a look at the grid very quickly. I just copied and pasted the code from the Kendo side to kind of show how copying pasting essentially would work. But when you want to set up a grid very quickly, you set up the grid. In this case, I am using what we call the server binding approach. You probably want to do AJAX binding, but when you're dealing with local data, that means that the view already loaded the products. It came with a controller, so the products are already here. So based on those products, we're going to populate the data. So the grid is going to have these 5 columns right here, and then it's essentially a bunch of configuration. Is it going to be pageable? Is it going to be sortable? Is it going to be scrollable? Is it going to be filterable? And then, like I said, this is at the end of the day, it's not using any AJAX operations at all, which is why we turn the server operation to false. And then on the server side, when we load the page, here we see that we are passing it a controls view model that has a products property that has a bunch of products. It's just 100 products that I just created via code, not really coming from a database or anything like that. That's about it. The grid can get more advanced, and like I said, I am going to be putting up a better version of the grid on the sample that's going to be on GitHub so that it's and the database is going to be part of the solution. And if Visual Studio works correctly on your end, you should just be able to hit the run button and go. Of course, the sample is going to require that you have Telerik MVC installed on your machine. So you need to have at least a trial or a complete version of Telerik MVC. All right, I got lost here with all the questions. We got quite a few. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best. Will panels still work in Bootstrap 4? I don't believe so. No, I think panels are gone. You need to switch to cars, but I might be mistaken. But from my understanding, the cars are the replacement for those panels. There's a link to download the library. You will want to get to that through the demos page right here. You click here, and it will get you set up with a trial license for the product. Okay. Would Telerik official support wait for quarterly release or be sooner? Hopefully it'll be sooner. We are not tied to, you know, it's just quarterly and we can't do anything. If they release official Bootstrap before the day after our quarterly release, we'll still probably get to it before the next quarter. So yeah, you won't necessarily have to wait for the next quarter. Can you remove a column? Yeah, you can certainly remove columns. You can actually make them go away depending on, you know, you can have a menu to remove the column. You can have a, you know, there's quite a few things you can do. All right. Angular, that's correct. I have to assume that somebody's asking, I have to assume that the controls will work well with Angular. So not the MVC controls. MVC controls are not meant for Angular development. So at that point, you want to use Kendo UI, in particular, Kendo UI for Angular. Is it good advice to use Bootstrap with AngularJS front-end application in a SPA? It is very much. Bootstrap is very heavy on single-page application apps. So yeah. All right. Yeah, we have quite a few questions, but we are going to cover, you know, most of the questions we've covered already, and the main questions will be answered on the blog that we're going to write as a recap. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us today. You know, we're very excited to be running this webinar. So we hope that they are helpful and that we're covering the right topics. Of course, we want to hear from you. In fact, we are going to be running a poll right after we're done. So any feedback that you want to provide to us will be great, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you all.